Hello everyone, welcome to our Thursday session, live session, so live editing session for the next hour. It's good to see loads of you back on, loads of you normal repeat guys, but also loads of new people from all over the world. That's quite exciting. There we go. So Alan, to answer your question, yes, you get respect for tasting wine, but no, you don't get a pass for not turning up last week. There we go. So for all of those guys that are like Martin, who has gone to rescue his wheelie bin from last night's wind and rain and storms, and that are looking for some sunny pictures today, I can tell you now there aren't any in the pack, I'm afraid. However, we have got some cool ones to have a look at. Hopefully we'll look at some new features too. So normal sort of rules apply. We're going to be going through the next hour of editing your images in Capture One. The version of Capture One that we're using today is obviously, well, not obviously, but as a result of this week's launch is now going to be version 21.1 or 14.1 if you have a look at the actual software build. That means if you go into your version of Capture One and it does not say 14.1, you're not on the current latest version. Of course, you can carry on using version 20 or version 12 for that matter. A lot of what we're going to run through today is going to be the same in terms of the tools that we use, but obviously some of the newer features you won't have in the previous versions. For those of you that don't know what was in 21.1, we actually did a video, what was it, Tuesday it launched. So 21.1 includes some new toys, so style brushes and custom style brushes. That's quite new. Linked layer brushes, which although was quite a small reveal, let's call it that, actually really does change the way that you edit, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. You've got the new import viewer. I'm not going to go into that necessarily, but it's a better way of importing files. You get a better preview of what you're bringing in. Then there's possibly a contentious one, the Keystone Tool enhancement. We'll talk about that in a second. More camera support, more pro standard profiles, and live view for some Leica models. So overall, it's a decent pack for an interim release. So remember, this isn't a major release. This is version 21.1. Those of you that have 21, this is a free update. Just go into your account, the download section on capture1.com. You can get hold of it. If you're a subscriber, obviously you get access to the latest one anyway at all times. For those of you that aren't on 21.1, as I say, you can follow along with version 20 perfectly happily in this session. We'll just flag if there's new features being used. But go into your account and see if you want to upgrade. Just on things like Keystone and Pro Standard profiles and stuff like that, because I've seen in the Facebook group, and we'll I'm sure pick up on it later on. There's a bit of a mixed response to this. Now, the challenge here for Capture One is throughout the year, and this is unfortunately the way that software has grown up. We've been accustomed to having releases, big announcements, major releases once every year. And Capture One is in that sort of rotation. So every year there is a major release, and then of late or recently, the last few releases, there's been an interim release which has had some more features in. This isn't a case of the engineers or the developers holding stuff back for an interim release or being forced to release this stuff early because people were disappointed in what they wanted in a particular version didn't come to fruition. The guys will release stuff as and when it's possible to do and as and when it's ready. So things like the Keystone tool, the enhancement that was made, there is no new Keystone tool. We've already covered that in the pro tips intro that we did for 21. The Keystone tool works the same way. But what they did is they thought, well, if we're opening up the code anyway, let's just make it a little easier for people to use. So things like Keystone tool have been enhanced. They're not brand new. It's not a major announcement, major release. And at some point that may change again. But I don't want a world where the guys at Capture One hold everything back for a major release because that's better for marketing. I also don't want a world where they rush stuff and try and ram it into a major release ahead of when it's ready. I much prefer the way of working when things get released and issued when they're suitable, when they've been tested properly, and when we know that they're going to deliver some value. The same goes with things like pro standard profiles. So I know the guys are working through them, and they're building that great big database of pro standards as we talk. But they can't do it all at once. So some of it is patience, some of it is priority, and some of it is, remember, just because you want a feature doesn't mean the rest of the world does. And it's what's quite it's heartening to see lots of people putting in their feature requests and stuff. Putting in a feature request is not a ticket at a deli counter and then 2 minutes later you get your product. It's a request to say, I think this is a good idea, and I hope more and more people do this, because it's a great way of feeding back to the team. So if you go on to support.captureone.com, fill out the feature request for things that you think are missing. The guys can combine all that lot up. And let's imagine, though, this is the problem here. If I've got 5 friends that have also put the feature request in, brilliant, that's 5 people. It doesn't mean it's the most important thing to the world or to the developers. So it's request, that's all. So I'm sort of in a place where it was a little bit flat to see some of the reactions around the internet. And I think most people have taken it in the positive way that these midpoint releases are intended. But I don't see how we can take a negative out of a company that's releasing brand new features halfway through a release cycle. It's what people want to see, I think. So we should be hopefully embracing all of that change and making use of it. So there we go. There's my little rant box for the day. Let's get into Capture One. Now, remember, you're viewing me about 8 seconds in the past, as it were. So please comment as we go. Put your questions and views and challenges in. We'll try and cover stuff live as we go. But just remember, there's a little bit of a delay before I see it on the screen. Okay, Pascal, indeed, let's not behave as spoiled brats, although we certainly are. I am a spoiled brat. I'm happy to be a spoiled brat. But every now and then we just got to say thank you. Or actually, it's not thank you. You buy the software, you pay for the software. I pay for the software. It's about a value challenge, which is if I think I'm getting good value out of what I'm buying, great. If I don't, then I can choose another tool. But I think what we've got now in 21.1 is a pretty damn good tool. So let's get and use it. Okay. So let's have a little look at Fred's image. I lost my eyeballs there for a second. So unfortunately, as I say, Martin, we don't have pure sunshine. We do have sand and we do have sun, but we also have a massive, great big storm cloud in here. So let's just have a look at what Fred had been playing with. This is the after. This is before. So for those of you that aren't familiar with some of the, we'll cover some of the basics as well in Capture One. To get the before and after screen up, you can go to this little button up here, before and after. You can hold down on here and you can choose whether you want a full view or a split view. Most people tend to like the split view because it allows us to whiz around and look how successfully we've edited stuff and feel all good about ourselves. But if you want the keyboard shortcut for it, just press Y on the keyboard. So Y brings it up and makes it disappear again. So where we are in this image, and Fred had asked, we've got some noise issues. It's actually on an APS-C, so a crop sensor. And as it's been recovered, we've got a few little challenges in here. Things that I'm not surprised to see, because a lot of what Fred's done is with clarity. And whenever you try and pull up noise, whenever you try and pull up texture from shadow, especially on a smaller sensor, typically you're going to bring up some noise with it, and that's what the clarity is doing. It's pulling up texture and contrast, and that's what's going to pull up the noise. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I was going to mention something very exciting. Someone, I can't remember who it was, someone on the Facebook group was asking about Keystone on a particularly bright image. Now, as I say, the Keystone tool has not changed. All that's changed is the handles and the lines. But I get it. If you're shooting on snow or in a bright sky, it can be difficult. This is not an official answer. This is not a tutorial. This is not a proper tool. But let's say I have a really bright image. Sorry, Fred, I'm just borrowing your image for a second. And I've got these keystone lines. For a start, they have added in to the keystone lines some shadowing. So you shouldn't really have a scenario where you can't see the line at all. But if you did have that scenario, what if we just pulled down the exposure? Way under, for sure, and not how you're going to end up with the final image. But in order to get the keystone right, of course it would be possible to pull down the exposure, make the keystone adjustment clearly with those tools, and then just reset your exposure back again. Anyway, it's just a thought. It doesn't, as I say, that's not the official line, and I know that the guys want to improve Keystone even further, but it's a possible way forward. Okay, So I've got a couple of let's start with Kenny. So delivery of the feature and expectation complements the perception of the Facebook. Yeah, I see it in our Facebook group. Obviously, that conversation's been happening this week. I think most people genuinely want the best for this tool, and that it's born out of frustration that they want better. But you know, these things do take time. That's one of the challenges. And David, yeah, the fury actually there was. Is because there's a sense of disappointment with 21, and especially with the buy before knowing. So you can probably guess what I'm going to say. Don't buy before knowing. Now, I know that was a marketing message. I know that it was put out as a, do you want to buy this black bag and we can't tell you what's in it? If I'm not comfortable buying something because I don't know what's in it, I don't buy it. And that's the risk. You're getting, in that case, it was a discount for the reward of not necessarily knowing what you were buying into. But yeah, it's a bit of a challenge from that perspective. I'm hoping no more blind sales happen, but who knows? It is a marketing tactic. Many companies use it, and I'm sure they won't be the last. Okay, so with our before and after, let's get back to Fred's image. We've got, as I say, the clarity that's pulled up has brought up some noise. Now, when we bring up contrast, that's one of the risks. And if I look at all the layers on here, that's pretty much been the bulk of it, and especially in the cloud layer. 65 on clarity is pretty punchy for a cloud. Now, here's a fun one. The reason I've loaded this image up to start with is because here is our original, no before and after, it's exactly the same. And I'm going to try one of the new style brushes. So one of the standard out-of-the-box style brushes. This image to begin with, I would be tempted just to play with the levels a touch. So we could shift the exposure up, of course. Let's do that. But we're going to risk, so in order to bring up the shadows, we're also bringing up the highlights. We've had highlights that are already pretty much near the top end. So let's be careful with pushing the entire histogram, which is what the exposure slider does. We could use brightness. Now, brightness will protect those highlights much better, but it also has the effect of flattening the histogram. So in other words, losing contrast. And what Fred was trying to do with this image is increase contrast. So all of these things will help lighten the image, but they're not necessarily going to get the effect that he wanted. We could go into our levels, and let's just pull them down a little bit here and up a little bit here. So what that does is it takes our histogram and it says, for what was a number 2, now make it 0. That's this left-hand side. So in other words, if it was almost black, make it completely black. What was 244, so what was almost white, make it now 255, completely white. So we're stretching that histogram out. Whenever we stretch the histogram, we add contrast. Whenever we compress the histogram, we lose contrast. And for full circle on this, just so everyone's on the same page, that's the risk of the high dynamic range tool. Because if I pull in, and if you watch this histogram at the top, if I recover highlights, recover whites, so pull them down, recover shadows, and recover blacks, so push them up, what I'm doing is I'm compressing the histogram, and you can see it on the screen, into the middle. The closer the histogram is, the less contrast I have across the whole image's tonal range. The further apart those lines are, from left to right, from top to bottom, the more contrast I have. Now, maybe too much in this case. I've actually gone the other way with HDR. But that's what we're talking about when we're saying about high contrast and low contrast images. And the HDR sliders are designed to recover effectively where we've got too much contrast. We can pull it back in. You can now obviously go into negative or reverse values with HDR, which allows you to push it even more. And interestingly, one of the things that the Deep Sky brush, so new style brush from Capture One, will do is it will actually enhance the highlights. It will bring them up. So style brushes on the left hand side. If you don't have the style brush section, just click on any of these little 3 dots here with your right mouse button. Go to Add Tool, and you will find, just try and pull it on the screen, style brushes at the bottom of that very long list, and it will add it into your workspace. If you can't find it when you add it, it's probably added it to the bottom. So then you want to move it up to get it back into view. But typically, default workspace, it'll be at the top. Choose a style brush, really easy. Tick it, just click it with your mouse. And then from there, you're going to see the brush appear on the screen. Some style brushes have their brush settings saved within them. Others may not. In this case, it's quite a wide brush. So I'm on the raw image, no changes made to this image. I'm on the background layer. As I start drawing my brush, you're going to see it's created a new layer on the left-hand side called Deep Sky. And there's our Deep Sky applied. That was pretty easy. So for all of the layers that we have in Fred's original one, there's a style brush that sort of does it almost in one go. Now, this doesn't mean that the style brush becomes your default to do everything with. However, it's a good starting place. And in this case, I think it's probably gone a bit too far. So likewise, we've pulled up some of this detail here. It's not actually as noisy as it could have been. Remember, when you're looking for noise, by the way, always look at it, not out here. This is the preview. You need to, when you're dealing with noise and sharpening, those two things, you must do it at 100% or more in some cases, but 100% is the good place to start. You'll see that the preview often shows a little more noise than is actually there. It's the 100% view that you want to use as a benchmark for whether or not there is noise in the image. And in this case, if I look here in this cloud, there's not a lot using the Deep Sky style brush. In this one here, there's a bit more brought up. So in a lot of the real pushes of clarity, it's brought up some of the noise that sat within this image in those flatter tones. Whereas in the Deep Sky one, maybe not. What it's done, and actually whenever you go to any of the style brushes now, you can see what they're doing. So just go through the tools. We can see whether or not, for example, it's doing something clever here with the blues, which it is. So Deep Sky is picking on those blues and it's reducing their luminosity. So it's darkening them. It's increasing the lighter blue saturation. Then we go onto our exposure tab and it's increasing contrast. It's reducing highlights, but it's actually bringing up whites. So in HDR terms, remember the highlights are the top roughly quarter of the histograms, the top 25%. The whites are the top, let's say 5%. It's a bit of a rough guess. So it's actually pulling down most of the very brightest parts of the image, but it's pushing up the true whites, in other words, the clouds, to make them a little more, what's the word? Glossy, I guess. Now, here's the challenge in this image. This cloud, so it is a cloud, but Capture One doesn't know that. Capture One knows these are tones. And this tone here is blue. I can see that from this readout on the top of the screen wherever I move my mouse. 60 red, 70 green, 97 blue, so it's shifted into the blue, 70 overall in luminosity. So that grey number goes from 0 to 255, matches your histogram on the left-hand side. 70 luminosity is not going to feature in either highlights or whites. So in high dynamic range terms, Capture One isn't touching this area of the cloud. What it is doing is touching it in the clarity tool, and it's touching it in contrast. And that's why you're seeing this sort of darkening and deepening of this cloud, even though this style brush is designed to brighten clouds. It's designed to brighten bright clouds, just to be clear. But overall, that was one click, and I've got to there. If I think this is too much and it's pushed it too far, very easy. We can just lose some of the opacity in the layer itself. Remember, you can do this with any layer. So even a healing layer or cloning layer or whatever, you can create any layer, do whatever adjustment you want, and back it off. You can reduce the amount of the effect just by changing the layer opacity. So with these style brushes, well, you know, some of them out of the box are going to be a little bit too much. As Francois just said, right on cue. It seems to be too much. I agree. So we can back them off. And also remember, at the end of the day, it's a mask. So if I press the M key on my keyboard, I can see where I drew that mask. So let's imagine I don't want this to happen right here in the cloud. So I'm happy with all of this stuff around, but here it's gone too dark. Well, that's pretty easy to fix. I go to my eraser, press the E key on the keyboard. I can reduce the opacity of that. Let's make it a bit softer, a bit bigger. And I can just erase from the mask. Now, you're seeing what's happening to the mask. Let's see what's happening to the picture. As I do that, we're just reducing the effect in this middle part of the cloud. So the whole point with these style brushes is they are not there as immediate quick fixes in the long run. For now, they've obviously launched a load of these to start and help you get going. But you know, let's be honest, if I look at the, you know, where are we? Brightness plus. What has it done? Well, it's increased brightness up to 50. Now, a lot of the style brushes, remember, have a low flow. So even though this is at the maximum, I've got to paint over it quite a few times to get it really up to that 50 mark, because I'm adding to a mask every time I do that. But I could have done that with a brightness layer. I could have done an exposure or a dodge and burn with an exposure layer. I could do deep sky, although that's a slightly more complex one, with the tools. The power in these style brushes is once you've got a style that you like, that you've built, that you're happy with for a certain type of image, nighttime cityscape, or I don't know, golden hour thunderstorm or something like that, save them. Genuinely get your presets, all your adjustments done. Style brushes, click on this little dot or 3 dots up here, save style brush. Save them as a custom style brush and you can use them forever on all of your images. I wouldn't necessarily use these style brushes that are one function brushes, because I can do it myself on a layer. But when we're using multiple tools and adding lots and lots of adjustments together, that's really cool, because now we can just paint that whole toolbox in one go. And again, if it's over the top, well, first off, we can save our brush settings with that layer with a low flow. So we reduce the risk of going over the top. And even if you do go over the top, well, you can just adjust the opacity, fix it just like that. So there we go. There's your style brushes. And more importantly, for Fred's image, it helps with the sky straight away. And it also, because we're not using all that clarity, we're doing it with other means. We're using a little bit of overall contrast, some HDR, half the clarity that was in the original shot, and the color editor. You get the same amount of drama, but without needing to rely on lifting some of that noise as well. Gary's just said we need to create a Milky Way style brush. Potentially, yeah. So, you know, think about what you typically do on a night shot in a Milky Way. Typically, you're going to cool down the sky. You're going to increase clarity. You might play a little bit with contrast. You might play a little bit with tint sometimes. But all of those things you could combine into a brush and just add it on. There we go. Paul has just made the point, and yeah, spot on. So you'll notice whenever I go to a different style brush, so if I want to remove some haze out of this shot, I'm not sure whether we would, but fine, let's just do that. It now creates a, it's not bad actually, it creates a haze remove layer. If I go back to my deep sky brush, so under enhancements, deep sky, and start painting, it automatically goes back to my deep sky layer. So the auto switching back and forwards to layers on the style brushes is really handy. And so is this feature, and I said I'd talk about it earlier, link the brush with layer. It used to be genuinely painful that when we would go from one layer to another, you would be stuck with the same brush. So if you were doing a detailed layer and then a wide layer, you'd be stuck with the same brush across the entire range of tools that you're using. You now don't have to do that, because as long as I have this ticked, this link brush with layer, if I make a change to the brush on this layer, it doesn't apply to the brush that's on this layer. So let's make this brush big on this layer, back to haze, nice and small, back to deep sky, nice and big. It sounds so stupid, so obvious and so minor, but this has already saved me a hell of a lot of time editing this week alone, just by having that. That's really, really important. Okay. So I missed a couple of other ones. Where are we? Joe, could you use a Luma to get 2 separate layers, one for the sky and one for the cloud? We could. Yeah, so the challenge with this, Joe, is the blending between the two, because, for instance, if I look at the Luma range of values here, this value here, let's say it's 61 up in the top, 61, 59. The sky here, yeah, we're at 70, 69, 60s, 50. There's not, even though we know cognitively that this is a cloud in the sky, by Luma values, it's not necessarily going to. So if I go to a Luma range on here, let's turn on our mask. Actually, let's do it on a new layer so we can really see it. So filled layer, we'll call it Luma test. So we have a mask that affects the whole layer. Let's go to my Luma range. And let's exclude the highlights and just go for the dark areas. So I get half a cloud-ish, and then it starts to fade out as I've got a soft fall off in there. If I went just for the highlights, I get a bit of a cloud, but not the rest of it. And in order to get the rest of the cloud here, I now start including the sky. This is a genuine challenge with Luma ranges, and it's a mental one, and because I still every now and then struggle with this too. What we perceive as differences in an image is not the same as what the Luma range sees as a difference. The Luma range is literally looking at that, effectively that grey number up there. Oops, sorry about that. If I made anyone sick through my mouse movement. But it's literally looking at that number, the 100, the 95, the 101 there. It doesn't see this, the Luma range that is, as blue. It doesn't see this as white. It sees it as a grey value from here to here. And that's the only way it can exclude things. So while we know this is a cloud on a blue sky, to capture one, this bit here may as well be sky. So separating out with the Luma range isn't going to be too handy here. Where are we? A couple of other questions. Could be very helpful with skin tone adjustment. Mahmood, I'm guessing you mean link brushes, or actually style brushes for that matter. Style brushes have got a couple of really nice little features in here for skin, the red skin reduction, teeth whitening, and iris enhance and so on. But the link brushes really is really helpful. Richard, yeah, link brushes is a game changer. It really is. But to Francois's point, I know where you're coming from, Francois. So deciding to remove the controls of every parameter and presents the final result with the style brush, I don't think they're going down that route. If anything, actually, what they're doing overall seems to be opening up more parameters. But here's the challenge with this sort of software. There's two groups of people that are using this stuff. You've got guys that have got a very strong technical background, very in-depth knowledge of color management and light control and all so on. But then you've also got the person that just wants to come on and very quickly edit a picture of a beach with a sunset. And what the style brushes do, actually, in my view, is it caters for both, because it saves me time. So if I know how to get the best out of the tools, but I can save it in a way that I can replicate in future, that saves me a lot of time. So I know how those tools work, but it would be good to save a bit of a few minutes every day. But equally, if there can also be a style brush out of the box that makes that image look a lot better immediately, by actually giving access to some of the tools, then that's kind of cool too. What I hope will happen, genuinely, is that by looking at what these style brushes do, because you're going to see more of these issued, and I'm sure there will be some people that try and sell them and all the other stuff. No doubt. There's always industry behind this stuff. But if you look at and actually open up what the style brush is doing, I'm hoping that people will start to see what actually happens with it. The other day on the launch video, in fact, David and Alex were talking about the saturation brush. So let me just do that here. For example, the saturation brush, you see this very strange circle that not a lot of people are familiar with? It's on the advanced color editor, and what it does basically is it affects only the bits that are outside of the brightest parts of the image. So the most saturated colors. The desaturated colors, the bits that are closer to white, it doesn't actually affect so much. So by deconstructing some of these style brushes, hopefully those people that are struggling with the technical bits might be able to see what's actually going on behind the scenes, which is kind of nice. Right, where are we? Ruben, we could always create a mask from a color selection. Absolutely. So, but again, same challenge. I can create a mask from the color selection to try and separate the cloud from the sky. Only one problem. This part of the cloud is the same color as this part of the sky. So again, what our eyes see and what the data sees are two very different things, unfortunately. So it's a bit of this one in particular is a bit of a challenge. If we were talking about the Simpsons title video, fluffy white clouds, dark blue background, not a problem. Luma range would work, color selection would work with a mask and all that sort of stuff. But the rest of it, not so much. Erwin's just asked, can the light and contrast style brushes be hidden? These, I mean, you unofficially you could I would say hack, but explore the file system. You can explore the package within Capture One, and you could delete those default brushes if you didn't want them. But I'd just do the 3 ticks. What I've actually done on my workspace, funnily enough, I've taken some of the ones that I quite like, saved them as my own custom style brush, and organised my own. So I actually have this closed. The built-in ones I have closed. I've taken the built-in styles. Some of them I've tweaked a little bit because my opinion differs from people in Capture One, and I've saved them as my own custom style brushes already. So I have the built-in ones collapsed, and I just now rely on that custom style brush, which that works. I'd sort of be tempted to do it that way. Illumographic, are the style brushes kept in a file so we can transfer it to another computer? Yes. If you go onto, so on our YouTube channel, go onto the Pro Tips playlist. You'll see the 21.1 intro in there. And there's a whole section, it's chaptered. Near the end, you'll see where they're stored, how to get to them, how to send them to other people, and how to organize them. So yes, you can absolutely do that. Earl's saying, in general, I think these type of stormy skies are very difficult to edit. Yeah, they are, because what the editing program sees and what we see in our eyes are two very different things. And it's about exactly that, the luminosity being the same, the color being the same. So separating them out is really, really challenging. What we can do here is, in this bottom part here, I would like to boost that just a little bit. So I'm just wondering whether we can go back into our built-in ones. Maybe we just do a little bit of extra contrast down here. Oh no, don't like that at all. No, let's not do that. Let's do it the old school way. So gradient layer. So I'm going to create a new layer and call it foreground or foreground if I can't type correctly. And we're going to draw a very, very, very tight mask down here, so you can see. So it covers here and not anything of the sky. And with the foreground, let me just zoom to get this sort of full width for us. With this foreground, I think I'm in a place where I want to lift the shadows just a little bit as well, because this all, believe it or not, again, we think this is highlights. It's not. It's sat in the shadows. It's sat certainly left of the histogram, or left of the middle. So the shadows is what's going to lift it up. Put a bit of clarity on there. There's no real point in dehazing. We could do, but it's not going to do much. It's just going to make it look too contrasty. But what we can do is just lift that brightness just a touch as well. Just so we don't lose the fact that there is a foreground in relation to this cloud that sat behind it. So that's where I would be, Fred. Sorry, we've used your image for quite a few explanations. Sorry about that. But I think it's quite important, because with all of these different style brushes, you've got a very quick way of testing new looks. And this way that you did this here, there's nothing wrong with that at all. With all the clarity that you added in there, the levels adjustment on this foreground bit was the right thing to do. But the risk is, by layering clarity with contrast adjustments with another contrast adjustment, you bring up quite a bit of noise, which I think you saw in the cloud. Whereas limiting the amount of adjustments you do will help. Now, if this is still sat too dark for you, well, that's pretty easy to do. All we're going to do is create a new filled layer over the top. And I'm just going to call it levels. The reason I do this as a layer, just so you know, well, one is logical, because I know that that's applying to everything below it. Two, if I decide later on that the levels were pushed too much, so maybe actually we want to shift it to be a little bit brighter in the midtones, I don't have to go back to levels to adjust it. I can just play with the opacity of the levels layer. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing it. So Fred's on board. Okay. So Fred, we have used your image for quite a lot of stuff. Sorry about that. But hopefully it's helped a lot of people to understand what's going on. There is up here, just so you know, I don't know whether you managed to get out of it in here. Maybe you did. Yeah, there's a little lens flare. I was talking to someone else very, very recently about this. Lens flares and dust spots and stuff, I stopped using the dust spot tool a long time ago. So what I would do, oops, clicked in the wrong place. What I would do is use the healing brush. It tends to deliver a much better result. There's our dust spot gone. But, you know, overall, nothing wrong with this version of it, nothing wrong with this version. It's just we've used different tools. If anything, this top part is starting to come across as a little bit too bright. So my final adjustment would probably be a top gradient. Let's just draw that across there. And with that top one, we'll just pull the exposure down a bit just to balance out that shot. But overall, there we go. And again, to your question, Fred, actually, about APS-C lenses, sensors, they don't have to be inferior in that sense to full frame. It's obviously the pixel size is an issue. Sometimes they can be a bit noisier, but a lot of it is just around not overlaying too many different functions that attack the same thing. So, you know, having a layer that does HDR recovery and then a different layer that does contrast, okay, that's fine. But once you have a clarity layer, then a structure layer, then a contrast layer, then a levels layer, they're all attacking the same part of the image, which in this case is contrast. And that's where things start to get a bit unstuck. This is Ilan's, Ilan or Ilan, not sure. Sorry if I said it wrong, image. Now, if I'm honest, the question that came in actually from Ilan was, you know, is this good enough? Is this ready to print? The answer is yes. The reason I'm going to show it is actually because this is a really, really cool edit. So we're just going to run through it because it's done really well. So this is the before. So again, that Y key. This is the after. Like, it's nice. I'll give you that one. But if I look at the amount of effort that's gone into getting this right, it's pretty extreme. So let's have a look here. So we've got our background, which is pretty much as is. And this is a trick that I would try and sort of get to people, which is, if you can, unless it's just going to be a very quick edit for one layer, leave your background alone and do the edits on a layer. It just gives you a lot more flexibility. So let's build this up. The body. Well, obviously that's been changed in terms of lifting the shadows, lifting the black. So again, there's HDR sliders, structure and clarity. So when we're dealing with fur on animals, structure and clarity are a big changer. So if we just undo that there and do it, we get all that detail in the texture and the hair and all the bits of fur all the way around the edge. Now, that structure and clarity, the high dynamic range here has lifted that animal up out of the background. And there's a very big shift in warmth in the white balance. So this layer on its own was just to do that. Lift the shadows, enhance structure and clarity, and warm up the skin tone, or the fur tone, I guess. To do that, this is a very detailed mask. There's a lot of feathering going on, a lot of auto masking going on it. But the masking on it is really, really good. It's really nice and detailed. So there's our body. After our body, we've then got the background. Now the background, funnily enough, has actually had its contrast reduced. So just like the body had its warmth increased by quite a bit, actually. It was from 4,600 to 5,200. You know, it's a big shift in warmth, 600 Kelvin difference. But then the background's been warmed up again by another 300. And there's some reduction in contrast. So although the background was already in blur, it's had its contrast reduced. But here's the key thing. It's this levels change that does it. So if I just reset that temporarily and re-enable it, just like I did with the cloud shot from Fred. So what Ilan's done is pulled these mid-tones in the background up to be brighter, while pretty much leaving the shadows where they are. If you do this with exposure, everything gets brighter. So we don't want that in the background. We want to leave the dark parts where they are, but lifting the rest of it up, using levels to do that is a good move. There's a point here from Jose. So clarity, clarity and structure for if you want to show fabric, as in actually show the material of the fabric. Clarity and structure are your friends. So anything like that, fur, hair, materials, textures, wood grain as well. Clarity and structure are your friends for that. So use that a lot if you can. But again, not too much. So when I say use that a lot, I mean make sure to get the best out of it, but don't whack it up to 100, not even 50. You know, really it should be in the sort of 30 to 40 range, to be really, really careful. Owen, I think your question about resetting has helped, but if not, yell again. I think, sorry, has helped. I think someone has helped you with it, but if not, then yell. Okay, the head. So the head's got its own little mask. Oh, and by the way, the mask on the background is the reverse mask, so the inverse mask of the body, but actually with a lot sharper edges on it. So where the body mask had a lot more feathering on here, it's not quite the same overlap. These are actually done separately as different masks. So head, what we've got is a little bit of brightening. Whoops, before I delete the name of it. A little bit of brightening, but also some saturation boost. So we've got a little brightness there, a little saturation boost, some clarity on there, and all that's done is just lifted the head to just be a bit more of a subject and separate from the rest of the body. And then body rear, basically warm up. Overall, so if you think about it, each of those layers, while detailed, is a relatively small shift. But when you add them together, look at the transformation in those two images. And this goes from, actually it's a nice shot to begin with for sure. But this is really nice. It's really ready for a print. And I'd certainly be on that place. I'd just delete that one though. In fact, I'm gonna have finally some input into this shot, Ilan. I want to get rid of that because it's annoying me. But there we go. There's my input. Done. All joking aside, I would almost be tempted though with this to play a little bit with dodging and burning as well. You could do a little bit more separation down here. You know, I'm going to do it very lazily here with a style brush, funnily enough. But I could be tempted just to low flow, just bring some of this down again, just to lift that deer, I think. Can't remember what you said it was. Anyway, just to separate them out a little bit more, but not so much that it looks like they've been masked. But overall, genuinely really nice edit. Well done. Okay, so where are we? Yeah, oh, deer shot is fantastic edited. Selective edit all over on the layers. Yeah, it's masking. It's funny. We often try and look at ways of avoiding doing masking. So luminosity helps us, selective color helps us, and all the other stuff. But when you spend the time to really mask an image well and then have complete control over the different elements of it, it really is we talk about game changers for tools. That's where the game changing is, putting in the effort into getting those masks done. Okay, but yeah, get it printed. We want to see that printed. Pavel, I'm going to give you some bad news, I'm afraid, because your question was about the amount of noise that's in the sky and, you know, could we do anything else to lift it up? So let me just before and after us again. So the changes that are made are, you know, they're pretty much the standard changes I would recommend to do with the sky. Some levels lifting, you know, reducing some of the lights down here, cooling down the sky a little bit. They're all standard things, and you've done them as I would recommend. The challenge with this, I don't know what camera it was actually. Where are we? Oh, so Panasonic is a Lumix, yeah. Is that a Lumix G9? I think maybe. I'm not sure. But it's just been pushed too far. You're not going to get rid of that amount of noise. We can, you know, we can go and give it a try. So let's create a new filled layer. So in here, new filled adjustment layer. With that adjustment layer, we could bring down the luminance noise. That's going to help get rid of that graininess. But look at the artifacts you're now introducing. You see these lines? When you hear people talk about artifacts, they're talking about shapes that start appearing that shouldn't be there. This is a perfect example of it. So without that, you see noise. With it, the noise is depleted, but these start to be a bit more enhanced, these sort of horizontal crisscross lines. And because there's just so much noise in there, you're really not going to be able to completely fix this in a way that's perfectly nice. Where you're sort of at with this, at f3.2, you know, ideally we'd want a much wider aperture lens, you know, 2.8 minimum, preferably even wider. ISO 6400 may be okay, but on your camera, maybe it needs to be a little lower than that to avoid the noise. And if it's lower, maybe, at 12 millimeters, you could get away with having a 25-second exposure and it wouldn't trail too much. So it's possible to do, but I think it may be a setting thing instead. Mahmood, do you think Capture One will add a pen tool with the 2 control arms like the masks in a precise way? Oh, like in Photoshop. I don't know is the answer. If that's what you want and that's what lots of other people want, then please submit it as a feature request. I don't know if it's in the pipeline. I know for masking there's lots of advanced tools that are already in there, but it tends not to be based on paths. It tends to be more based on pixels and feathering and auto masking rather than drawing shapes. Shape-based masks tend to be more around content changing than enhancing, but maybe in the future. Randall's asking why don't I like Topaz denoise. I'll tell you, it's a simple answer, because it has never ever done a good job for me, if I'm honest. I've used it since I think the very first version I had of the Topaz suite was on a CD. I got it in Las Vegas. I think it was CES maybe, or I don't know. I had the whole suite and was really excited because with denoise and what was the other one? Oh, there was another one anyway. It started out as part of a smaller suite. I was hoping for great things, and it introduced artifacts. And what I've found is the higher resolution images that I use and put through denoise, the more artifacts it creates. So from a distance, the effect of denoise is okay. When you really get into the image quality up close, it's not as good as people think when you actually look at it properly, in my opinion. Doesn't mean that's right. That's opinion. It's not fact. But for me, it's just not worth the pain, because I've seen the amount of processing it's tried to do, and actually in some cases I would have been better off leaving the noise. Right, where are we? Well, yeah. So Pablo, yeah. So exactly. So based on what you're shooting as well, it may change. So Pablo's saying, on some images with birds, it can help, great, but on the night sky, it's worse than leaving the noise as it was, which is my experience. Paul's DxO for noise. Honestly, so I haven't personally tried DxO on noise. Let's have a play with it. I'll have a look at it over the next week or so and see what we can work out. But yeah, potentially. There we go. And Paula's point, which is spot on. So we talk about, I want a Dehaze tool. I want style brushes. Great, wonderful. I want this tool. I want that tool, or whatever. It's a bit like Microsoft Word in my head. We always look at the new features and we forget that we don't use 90% of the ones that we already have. So that shot of Ilan's genuinely goes, in my view, to prove that it's about the amount of effort you're willing to put in sometimes, not just the tricks of the tools. And then this shot, I really like this shot too. We've got two shots that are quite stunning in today's session. So one was Ilan's and the second one from Doug. So this is that forest. It's a famous forest out in Dartmoor. I think it's Dartmoor. Old, misty, mossy trees. I need to get out there at some point, when allowed properly. But there we go. So, just for fun, and I don't know whether Doug's watching, but if you are, Doug, I apologise for what I'm going to do, but Earl made me do it. Let's see what the Dehaze and Rehaze tool will do. Actually, it's just interesting from my point of view. So let's get it to recalculate the shadow tone, just in case it's got it wrong. No, it didn't think it did. Let's dehaze it. Not bad, It's not bad, is it? We can rehaze it and add in a bit more fog. Interesting. Now, I think David actually touched on this the other day. I can't remember which one of the built-in ones it was. I think, it's Haze add. This brush isn't just doing rehaze. So we've talked about this before, adding in haze. So we could obviously create a new layer. And I can, let's make our brush nice and big. Put in a negative dehaze amount. And I can add in some haze. Now when you do that, you might have to actually recalculate the shadow tone to get it to properly add haze. But we're on a low flow, which isn't helping show the effect very well. But if I choose, let's say, this lighter color as haze, we can add in some fog. The problem is, and I have played with this a bit, it can look a bit fake. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, the clever people at Capture One have created for us a wonderful little tool called the Haze Add, also Haze Remove. And it's not just a dehaze function. So I'm going to go to the Haze Add brush and start painting. Now you'll see you've got a dehaze amount here of -50, but it's not going to do quite the same. And maybe that's down to shadow tone and so on. But to do this properly, we need a low flow, which it already has built into the layer, and a wide brush. And all we're going to do is just add in, oops, a little bit of extra haze up here, just to add a bit more depth out into that background. Now, Doug's concern with this one was this top right is very, very, very bright, and it's distracting. So I'm just going to try something here, which is we could try and fix that top right. But actually I'm in a place where we can balance this out. What's the issue is we want to almost see this and this a bit clearer. Well, what would happen if we just tried our little haze remove brush out of our style brushes, just to bring out a bit more detail? And if you look at the mask that we're drawing, it's all very light. It's not 100%. It's a low flow. In this case, it's a high opacity, but you could do it either way. And all I'm doing is just adding in a little bit of effectively clarity through this haze on the subjects. Let's turn the mask off. Now, again, just like with the other tools, if I don't like that, it's gone too far, which it has, we're going to just back away that opacity. But all I'm doing is effectively just highlighting or forcing the viewer to see the two subjects, which is these two trees. Overall, we could, let's go on to our, I'm just going to remove this adjustment layer. I'm going to create a new filled layer, and this is going to be a clarity adjustment. Oops. And with our clarity layer, strangely, I'm going to add in a touch of clarity. Now, we talked earlier about flattening and stretching and squashing the histogram. Well, what we're trying to do here is remove some of this this presence of this right hand bright area. So what I can do is I can create another layer and call it top right. And with that, we're going to add in a nice little mask here, but I don't want to affect these dark parts of the forest. I don't want them to get darker. So even though I've masked only in the top right, I'm then going to just pull down highlights, just pull down whites. And then if that's not enough, we're going to use the brightness slider. So not exposure, because exposure is at risk of pushing those dark parts too dark. Brightness is a slightly better ramp. It's more of a soft ramp out of it. Again, if that's still not enough, and what the concern was from Doug was that this here could disappear if we crop too much of the right-hand side out of it. We could do it with Keystone, or we could just shift this color up here to be less obvious and blue. So with that top right, same layer, because it's still this area that I want to adjust. I'm going to go to our advanced color editor. I'm going to pick this. Strangely, it's sat in that sort of bright bluey area here. Just going to expand this just to make sure we've got quite a lot of it. If I want to view that color on its own, we can turn the rest of the image to black and white. With this, where it's so light, it's very difficult to see whether this is in color or black and white, but it is. I can see it's in color in the top right. And with this color, well, what can we do? First off, we can just reduce the lightness of that color. Well, that's going to help a bit. But also what we could do is shift the hue. So we can go to be more green or more pink. More pink doesn't make sense, but more green may do. So we can do that. We can also enhance the, sorry, wrong way, the neighboring colors. Sorry, struggling for words. So the smoothness thing on here tells Capture One, yes, this is the arc that I want, but just like the fall off in a luminosity range, I can also add in some smoothness. So in other words, also include, but to a lesser extent, the neighboring colors here. So we've lowered this. We've lowered some, or we can lower some saturation a little bit too. Lower the lightness of just this color range here. So let's just see how we're getting on. So we're going from here to here. So we've got a bit more atmosphere in there, but still not quite the atmosphere that I was hoping for. Up here, I'm going to add in a little bit more darkness. So actually what I'm going to use is the, where are we? The burn layer. Oh, in fact, no, let's use brightness minus just to mix it up a little bit. We're just going to darken into here a little bit overall. Oops. And we'll probably darken up here as well. Now, someone's just said about using curves. I don't see the comment. Someone just mentioned it. Yeah, so using a curve to choose the selected areas, it will work. But if I go into our curves tool here, and let's go to our Luma Range, or Luma Curve, this is our linear curve, so it's literally 1 for 1 as we go up. As we change the curve, we can affect certain values. So we can only pick on our upper highlights, we can only pick on our shadows and so on. Of course, I'm only on that layer, so let's not do it on that layer. Let's create a new filled layer for the overall adjustment. So I can pull down our highlights and pull up our shadows and be very specific. Now the challenge here, as you can see, most of the data here sits in the shadows. So where we're saying I'm going to pull down my highlights, these aren't really highlights. They're all down here. So with a curve, we end up in this place of sort of, well, only being able to play with this much down here. So I've got to get really, really, really granular to be able to do that. So maybe I want to lower the very darkest parts of the histogram, but then rise up some of these slightly lighter parts. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's enough to add in the texture that we want. But just be careful with curves, that you're not looking at the overall curve as literally a translation of the picture. The curve is telling you where the data for this picture sits. And in this case, it's not all the way up. It's not spread evenly across. And that's why just picking on highlights, you'll get some of them, like up there, but you're not going to get everything. So that's our overall layer, our adjustment layer that's over the whole image. On this sort of shot, I know a lot of people don't like it, but I've been in a place where we slightly vignette that shot as well, just to bring the focus into the center, to make it look like a sort of pathway going through. And then I'm sort of in a place where clarity, again, another little bump of clarity, but also some structure. So we already did some clarity. I'm now just, I could go back onto our clarity layer and do it neatly, but for the sake of just keeping it on the same layer, I'm just going to bump that up a little bit more, just because I want to see some of this texture. So when we were talking about using structure to bring up texture in leaves and branches and moss, for that matter, it really, really does help. So if I just turn that off and on again, that difference there in that texture is huge. And although we've changed some of the lightness on it, we've also ended up getting some of the texture back too. So, you know, again, it's personal choice where you want to go to with this. But the whole point is, what we've effectively done is, with this little edit, even now, so we've got rid of a lot of the distraction of that light in the top right, but I've also played with the amount of haze that we've added or taken away using those brushes. Now, it depends what you want this picture to feel like, because if you don't want that, if you genuinely wanted this sort of fully hazy view, then don't do any of those clarity steps. Don't play with that curve. Don't play with the contrast and stuff like that. But if you do want to just clean up some of this stuff, then leave it in there. The advantage of doing all of these things as separate layers, each of them being a small micro change in some way, shape or form, you can back them off with your opacity. And I genuinely wish more people would play with opacity here, because we can, you know, we can absolutely look at that top right from 0 up to there. You can choose how much of this then to mix in later on. And that's the really powerful bit with layers. And we've sort of forgotten about layers a little bit because we've concentrated a lot on the tools. And yeah, so, you know, Derek, I can't remember what your first name is. Sorry. But anyway, is that Arthur Reverend? No, I don't know. I'm confused. Anyway, but yes, absolutely, you're right. So it's all about those little changes that add up to something that looks very different. And it's these opacities that are the bit that control how much those changes impact the image. So I would genuinely encourage all of you, when you're playing with this stuff, play with the tool by all means, but then keep going backwards and forwards and seeing what can be done with the opacities and those small changes in between each of the different layers, and have a real play with it. Randall's saying, I always burn the edges, old habit. It's an odd one. So vignettes are very much out of favor in that we want our lenses to be nice and bright all the way to the end. But equally, sometimes it's nice in a way to draw people in. And actually the only thing I would be tempted to do in this one here, just before we finish with this shot, is one small, just very specific shadow adjustment here. So I'm just going to lift the shadow up on this layer just into there, so we don't lose the idea that they are still sat in fog of some sort. So there we go. And thank you. It's Ronald. There we go. Got it. So Ronald/Derek. We'll stick with Derek in future. So yeah, so Randall's saying the new brushes will naturally provoke more use of the opacity slider. Absolutely. So the brushes, remember, are set at a predetermined flow, predetermined rate of application. Just bear that in mind when you're playing with them, because you can always back them off by using the opacity. So that's a lot today. Really nice shot from Doug. A bit of a challenge, unfortunately, from Pavel in terms of the Milky Way one, but genuinely, have a play with it. Try something with the settings and see if we can get a slightly less noisy version of it. Ilan's wonderful shot here. This is as a wildlife shot. This is really, really nice, and it took a lot of effort to do it, so it's great to see. And Fred's huge cloud that we've used to talk through style brushes. But overall, that's it for this week. Remember, we can continue those challenges and fun time discussions in Facebook. So we've got the Facebook group that we can obviously contribute to as you go on. The YouTube pro tip sessions include the introduction to version 21.1 and all of those tools in detail, so do check that out if you haven't already. Remember to upload your files to us if you want us to play with them and edit them next week. Next week will be same time, same place, online, obviously. So we'll see you then, hopefully for another hour. And in the meantime, stay in if you've been told to, or stay out if you've been told to. And we'll catch you in a week's time. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.